3,000 years. No empire came close. While others rose and collapsed, Egypt stayed stable. This was no miracle. Egypt built a system that controlled power, knowledge, and belief. Bureaucrats, writing, faith, law, tools that shaped one of the longest-lasting civilizations in history. Today, we uncover the real secrets behind Egypt's success.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on what is, well, what's arguably the single greatest success story in the entire history of human civilization.
That's a big claim, but I think it holds up.
It really does. We're diving into ancient Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and this wasn't a civilization that just, lasted a few centuries or even a nice round millennium.
Not even close. We are talking about an empire that kept itself going fundamentally and structurally for an astonishing 3,000 years.
3 millennia. It's a number that's so big, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
It is. I mean, think about it this way. The entire span of time separating us right now from the birth of Christ, that's shorter. Ancient Egypt was around for longer than that.
Wow.
So yeah, by pretty much any metric you want to use, its longevity is it's unrivaled. And for its time, it was almost certainly the most advanced, the most stable high culture on the planet.
And when we started going through the source material for this,
No.
I think we both expected the usual stuff, right? The drama of the pharaohs, the mystery of the
cold, the tombs.
Exactly. And we found all of that, of course.
Yeah.
But the real core claim that just kept coming up again and again is that Egypt's success wasn't really built on stone monuments. It was built on systems.
The systems were the absolute glue. Yeah, and our mission today is to sort of unpack the specific structural elements that allowed this incredible stability.
Okay.
We've basically boiled it down to 5 key pillars that held everything up over those 30 centuries.
So what are they?
First, the foundational power of bureaucracy and administration. Then you have the revolutionary technology of their written language. Third is the absolute structure of their divine leadership.
The pharaoh.
The pharaoh. Then their intense society-wide focus on achieving immortality through this huge cult of death. And finally, a really surprising one. A highly progressive set of social and legal laws.
That 3,000-year number just keeps echoing for me. It
Yeah.
means that the people who were, hauling stones for the Great Pyramid for King Cheops, they were separated by this vast gulf of time from the people living under the very last pharaoh, Cleopatra. And yet, the underlying system, the politics, the religion, it was all still remarkably recognizable.
That continuity is the whole story. It speaks volumes about the power of their founding principles. For any complex society to last that long, you need 3 things working perfectly together.
Right.
You need incredibly sophisticated organization, you need effective communication over huge distances, and crucially, you need a unifying philosophy that justifies it all.
And that philosophy, which I think we need to establish right up front, is the concept they called Ma'at.
Ma'at is the indispensable ingredient. It's often just translated as justice or truth, but that's really simplifying it.
It's bigger than that.
So much bigger. It represents the divine cosmic order, the principle of universal harmony, balance, stability. The entire purpose of the Egyptian state was to maintain Ma'at.
So everything the government did was in service of this idea.
Exactly. The pharaoh's #1 job was to be the guarantor of Ma'at. If things were orderly, if the Nile flooded on schedule, if the crops grew, if the kingdom was safe, that meant Ma'at was being upheld. It was the moral and religious justification for every single layer of the state.
And the most surprising part of that, the thing that actually maintained Ma'at on the ground, is something our modern society tends to hate.
Oh, yeah.
Sheer, unadulterated bureaucracy.
I know it sounds so dull, but it's true.
Let's start there then. Because ancient Egypt proves that if you want to build something that lasts for 3,000 years, you are going to need officials, rules, and a whole lot of paperwork.
It's the secret ingredient.
What's really fascinating is that the whole idea of the modern state, with all its complex parts, it didn't begin because someone sat down and, drew up a blueprint.
Right. It wasn't a theoretical exercise.
No, it grew out of just sheer physical necessity.
Absolutely. In Egypt, everything, and I mean everything, revolves around the Nile River. That annual flood, the inundation, it's both the greatest blessing and this immense logistical nightmare.
Nightmare that required massive coordination.
The survival of the entire civilization depended on it. on managing that flood and making sure the irrigation was efficient. This meant coordinating these huge, complex public works projects.
Like digging canals.
Digging, cleaning, and maintaining hundreds of miles of irrigation canals. We're talking about mobilizing and feeding and housing thousands of workers.
And you can't run that on just, verbal agreements or local tradition.
Exactly. The moment you have that scale of coordination, you immediately need contracts. You need laws that can be enforced. You need an efficient way to collect taxes.
And your weights and measures.
Regulation, all of it. That operational necessity, that's the foundation of what we now recognize as a centralized state. The Nile basically forced them to invent institutional organization.
And what's at the heart of any centralized state?
The administrative class, the officials. The Egyptian state was so heavily administered. We think of the pharaoh having all the power, but he delegated the actual governance to this massive infrastructure of officials who controlled pretty much every aspect of life.
So every bushel of grain, every hour of labor.
Every piece of land, yep. It was all assessed, regulated, noted, and written down by this huge class of administrators. They were the operational arm of Mott.
And this brings us to the social status of the bureaucrat, which is just so interesting. Today, being a civil servant isn't exactly seen as a glamorous job.
No.
But in ancient Egypt, it was pretty much the pinnacle of what a non-royal could achieve.
The status of an official was incredibly high. The sources point to this specific example, a man named Sebek Msaf, who lived about 3,700 years ago.
Okay.
And we know his status was immense because they made nearly life-size statues of him. That was a monumental honor, something usually reserved just for the royal family.
A statue of that size for an official. That tells you he wasn't just respected, he was part of the essential power structure of the whole country.
And if you look at how he's shown in these sculptures, it tells another really fascinating story about social status back then.
The way he looks physically.
Yeah. Sebek Msaf and a lot of officials like him are depicted with significant body weight, a noticeable paunch.
Which to us would be a negative thing.
Right. But it wasn't a criticism at all. In a society where most people were laborers, lean and worn down by hard physical work, a big belly was a clear sign of wealth, riches, and great respect.
It's a signal.
It's the ultimate signal. It says you're successful enough that you don't have to work in the fields, you eat well, you live a life of sedentary comfort.
So their standards were the complete inverse of ours today. Being physically fit meant you were a worker, but having a comfortable paunch meant you had power.
It was the ultimate status symbol. These officials were the, quote, secret power in the state. They were the engine room that kept everything stable.
And what were they doing?
They managed the incredibly complex tax revenue, which was often paid in goods, not money. So grain, livestock, metals. They maintained local order. And most importantly, they managed the giant granaries and distributed food to the population.
That logistical part is so key.
Right.
Because if the Nile flood failed one year, or if there was a drought,
Right.
it was this administrative class that had to make sure the reserves were allocated properly to stop a widespread famine or, a revolt.
Precisely. They maintained that fragile balance between feast and famine, which directly upheld Mott. Without these thousands of often anonymous officials, just diligently recording and taxing and storing and distributing, the whole thing would have collapsed instantly. They were the machine.
But that machine, no matter how good the officials were, it can't run without a sophisticated tool for communication and record keeping.
No, it can't.
And that brings us to the second pillar of their stability, hieroglyphic writing.
This was the crucial technological leap. The invention of hieroglyphs, which dates back to around 3000 BC by some unknown genius, is what really allowed the bureaucracy to scale up. To go from just managing a local village to running a unified, continuous empire.
And within that new bureaucracy, the role of the scribe immediately became this elite position.
Oh, it was the ultimate path to upward mobility. It was an exclusive club.
Because most people couldn't read or write.
Exactly. We have to remember that over 90% of ancient Egyptians were illiterate. So mastering the complexities of the script, all those characters, was considered a high art, a skill that guaranteed you security for life.
There's that wonderful piece of career advice from the source material that was given to young Egyptians.
Yes.
The promise was, become a scribe, then your limbs will remain smooth and your hands delicate, and you will never remain poor.
That phrase just perfectly captures the socioeconomic gap between the administrative class and the laboring masses, doesn't it?
It really does.
While the farmer or the quarry worker had this life of physical stress and uncertainty, the scribe enjoyed comfort, intellectual work, and a stable income. It was the ultimate way to escape the physical hardships of the time.
Let's talk about the writing system itself, because its genius wasn't just drawing pictures. It was how they made those pictures speak.
That's the monumental intellectual leap. That's what separates hieroglyphs from earlier, simpler pictographic systems.
So it started with just a picture of a thing meaning that thing.
Right. Initially, it was simple. A symbol for a pyramid just meant pyramid. A symbol for a goose meant goose. But the system evolved when they realized the signs could also represent the sounds of the words they depicted.
This is the rebus principle, using pictures for their sounds, not their meaning.
Exactly. This phonetic jump allowed for infinite flexibility and abstraction. The classic example is the royal title.
Right.
The symbol for a goose was pronounced sa, which meant sun. The symbol for the sun was ra, for the sun god.
You put them together.
And you get Sarah, son of the sun god. They were using pictures to spell out sounds and complex abstract concepts. It was brilliant.
And once they unlocked that idea, the script just, it must have exploded in complexity.
It did. It went from a few hundred key signs to eventually over 7,000 different written characters in use. And think about the continuous record this created.
Everything.
Official decrees, tax records, funerary texts, medical guides, myths, stories, all of it, continuously being recorded for 3,000 years. This provided that essential cultural memory, that continuity that the empire needed to survive.
But for all that robust continuous recording, the knowledge of how to actually read the script, it eventually died out.
The script went completely silent as the pharaonic empire started to fade and was replaced by Greek and then Roman influence. The need and the ability to read the complex hieroglyphs it vanished.
When was this?
About 2,000 years ago. And so all those powerful inscriptions on temple walls, they just became beautiful but essentially meaningless decorations.
And that silence might have lasted forever if it wasn't for one of the most famous and really most fortunate accidents in all of archaeological research.
The Rosetta Stone.
Which happened around 1800 during Napoleon's military campaign in Egypt.
The story has become legendary. A French officer who was supervising some construction work, he supposedly stumbled, maybe literally with his horse, over this big, unassuming slab of black basalt stone in the town of Rosetta.
And the significance of this big black rock, it can't be overstated. It was the key.
It was the key because it contained the same text. It was actually a tax exemption decree from King Ptolemy written in 3 different scripts.
Okay, so what were the 3?
You had the original hieroglyphs at the top, then the later more cursive Egyptian script called Demotic in the middle, and most importantly for the researchers at the bottom, you had ancient Greek.
Which scholars at the time could read.
Exactly. So they finally had a parallel text. They had the code and the key all in one place.
It kicked off this huge intellectual race for decades until the French scholar Jean-François Jean-Paul finally published the complete decipherment in 1822.
And that moment was it was absolutely pivotal. It was the moment that the ancient world literally began to speak again. The silence was broken, and almost everything we now know about 3,000 years of their culture, it was unlocked overnight, all because of the accidental discovery of a single tax decree.
It just shows how much can rest on one single lucky find.
It really does. Okay, so moving from the tools of administration to the centralized authority that was wielding them, the pharaoh. This figure was the ultimate structural anchor of the entire state.
And the scale of the pharaoh's timeline is it's staggering. Historians estimate there were roughly 300 pharaohs on the official coronation lists.
We mentioned that huge time gap between Cheops and Cleopatra.
Right, over 2,500 years. That's a longer period of time than the entire historical distance from, say, the Trojan War to the start of the Industrial Revolution. Wow. And the title itself defines the power structure. Pharaoh comes from the Egyptian Pira,
which translates to Great House,
named after the palace where he ruled. So the entire nation literally revolved around that one house.
His role was absolute. He combined every single facet of governance. He was the chief judge, the supreme general of the army, and the high priest who acted as the mediator between humanity and the gods.
And above all that, he was considered the living incarnation of divinity on earth.
A god among men. Yeah.
So given that he was a literal god, the protocol for, approaching him must have been intense.
Oh, it was heavily ritualized. Very intimidating. Subjects who were approaching him were often required to perform prostration, what's often described as kissing the earth, just to acknowledge his divine status, his whole wardrobe, his regalia. It was all designed to reinforce this godhood.
The insignia are so iconic. The double crown, of course, symbolizing the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt.
His complete political authority over the whole land.
Right. But the two most important symbols were the crook and the flail.
The most ancient and most powerful symbols, yeah. They're rooted in Egypt's agricultural past. The crook, which is what a shepherd uses to guide their flock, that symbolized the pharaoh's role as the benevolent shepherd of his people.
And the flail?
The flail, which was a kind of whip used for threshing grain, that symbolized his coercive power, his ability to dispense punishment and maintain order.
So it's the balance of soft power and hard power, guidance and enforcement.
Exactly. And even more profoundly, together they guaranteed the maintenance of Ma'at. The pharaoh, holding those tools, was literally responsible for ensuring cosmic stability in this life and securing safe passage for the kingdom into the next.
And if you're responsible for cosmic order itself, your personal schedule can't be left to chance. I imagine the palace ran like clockwork.
Completely rigid, the pharaoh's day was regulated down to the smallest detail. Nothing was random, because his actions were seen as having cosmic importance.
What did his day look like?
It started early, focused heavily on official duties, reviewing massive construction plans, signing legal decrees brought to him by those officials we talked about, and receiving important foreign diplomats.
And his court staff reflected that level of organization. We have to mention the incredible specialization of his medical team.
The squadron of royal physicians, yes. It says a lot about how advanced their medicine was, especially when it came to the most important person in the kingdom.
So you had specialists, like the keeper of the eye.
And then you have that famous, very specialized position that literally translates as the keeper of the anus.
The royal posterior.
The royal posterior. And look, it sounds funny to us, but it just underscores the critical importance they placed on the divine ruler's health, down to the most intimate and necessary bodily functions.
Health was stability.
If the pharaoh suffered, the kingdom suffered. Now, while his official day was incredibly regulated, the sources give us a little peek into his private life after sunset. The divine ruler would sort of transform into a family man.
He'd spend his evenings with his large family, which usually included his chief queen and often several secondary wives.
Right, and this was fundamental for dynastic stability. The main goal was to have as many children as possible.
Ramses II is the classic example of this.
Oh, absolutely. He's reported to have fathered well over 200 children. The sheer volume of heirs just reduced the risk of a dynastic collapse if the pharaoh died suddenly.
But this strategy for stability also leads to one of the most curious and, to our modern minds, frankly unsettling practices in the royal family.
The ritual of dynastic purity.
Right.
The goal was to secure the purity of the dynasty by not diluting the divine bloodline. Because the pharaoh was a god, his children needed to remain as close to that divine essence as they could.
So the common practice was to marry incredibly close relatives.
Brother, sister, father, daughter, even grandfather, granddaughter.
The religious justification for that must have been so powerful to override what we would see as a major taboo.
It was vital to them. They believed that divine power resided entirely within that family line. So to marry an outsider, even a high-ranking noble, risked weakening the state's most critical structural piece, the divine authority of the ruler. It was a custom that ensured the isolation of power.
Okay, so if the pharaoh guaranteed Ma'at in life, the guarantee of eternity shaped the life of every single Egyptian. And it wasn't just a religious belief. It was this huge organizational project fueling the vast death cult that defined their culture.
Their entire civilization was structured around achieving immortality. This obsessive focus on the next life provided a really powerful stabilizing force in this one.
And central to that pursuit was mummification.
A complex process they refined and perfected over thousands of years. And the procedure itself was an intensely secretive practice.
The techniques, the special recipe?
The resins, the oils. It was all proprietary technology, known only to a select group of initiates and passed down orally.
How long did it take?
The procedure was rigorous, and it was fixed at 70 days. This duration was chosen to correspond with the star Sirius, which was very important in their funerary myths.
And what were the steps?
The process began with purification. Then the body was dried using natron salt, which is a naturally occurring mineral mix found in Egypt. And then came the extractions.
The internal organs.
Right. Almost all of them. Stomach, intestines, liver, lungs were removed, individually embalmed, and placed in special vessels called canopic jars.
Even the brain.
The brain was meticulously extracted, usually through the nose, and then just discarded. They didn't think it had any functional importance.
But the one organ they always left in place was the heart.
That's the most important exception. The heart was left inside the body because they considered it the seat of the soul, the memory, the moral conscience. It was the one part of you that you needed for the final judgment in the afterlife.
And this incredible preparation wasn't just for people.
That's a wonderful detail. It really speaks to the emotional depth of their culture. Mummification was extended to beloved pets, mostly cats and dogs, who they saw as companions for eternity. Many museum depots today have dozens of these perfectly preserved animal mummies.
So preserving the body was step one. But to achieve eternity, you needed a clean moral record, which led to the ultimate moral test.
The judgment of the dead. Before you could face that judgment, you needed protection. So the deceased were often buried with a heart scarab, which was inscribed with magic formulas meant to stop the heart from, betraying its owner during the trial.
And this trial took place in the Hall of Two Truths, in front of the god Osiris.
Right, with Anubis, the god of embalming, assisting. And this is where we get that iconic image, the weighing of the heart.
The heart, the seat of your soul, placed on one side of a massive scale.
And weighed against the ultimate standard on the other side, the feather of Ma'at, the physical representation of justice and cosmic order.
The stakes could not have been higher. If you failed, your existence was over.
Permanently. Absolutely. If your heart was heavy with sins, with deceit or bad deeds, the scale would tip down, and the deceased would be instantly devoured by this terrifying creature called Amit, the man-eater.
Which was a composite of what?
The head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippo, the most terrifying animals they knew. And this resulted in a second death, an eternal oblivion.
But if your heart was light,
if it balanced perfectly, as light as the feather, then the path to eternal life in the field of reeds was open to you.
the psychological impact of that.
Yeah.
Of knowing that your moral conduct in this life directly determined whether you even existed in the next day.
Yeah.
It must have been an incredible driver for social compliance.
It was the perfect moral stabilizer. And it's amazing today we're learning even more about their lives and this whole process using modern, non-invasive science.
We're talking about CT scanning.
Highly advanced computed tomography, yeah. Research teams like the German Mummy Project can essentially perform a digital autopsy, examining these mummies without ever cutting them open.
And they can see incredible details.
They can see into their lives, down to their diet, their health. There's this case study of a man they call the city scribe's son. The scan showed he lived to be about 30, which, that was the average life expectancy back then.
What else did they find?
That he was remarkably well-nourished, which points to a secure, non-laboring life. And surprisingly, he had excellent teeth.
Which was rare.
Extremely rare. Most Egyptians suffered from terrible tooth decay and abscesses because of all the grit from the grinding stones that got into their bread. So his good teeth just confirmed his privileged background.
And the quality of his mummification was another status symbol.
Oh, for sure. The researchers confirmed that mummification was tiered by wealth. You had first, second, and third class processes, like buying a car.
And he got the luxury package.
He got the first class embalming, full removal of the brain and organs, meticulously wrapped fingers and toes, high-quality resins, the best preparation for eternity that money could buy.
Before we move on, we have to touch on that strange
Yeah.
and kind of dark historical footnote about mummies becoming a commodity.
That is the incredibly bizarre and ethically just, challenging story of Mumia Vera.
True mummy.
True mummy, yeah. By the 19th century and even into the 20th, ground-up Egyptian mummy was being sold across Europe, packaged in apothecary jars.
Sold as a medicine.
As a supposed cure-all, a panacea for all sorts of ailments. The belief in the restorative power of these ancient bodies was so strong that people were literally consuming ancient human remains. You could describe it as a form of cannibalism.
Just a total cultural misunderstanding.
A complete commodification of something that was once so sacred. It's shocking.
Okay, moving from the afterlife back to the living. Let's talk about the final structural pillar that helps Egypt last for 3,000 years. The surprisingly progressive status and rights that women had.
This is so critical, especially when you compare Egypt to, say, ancient Greece or Rome, where women were largely treated as property and excluded from legal life.
Ancient Egypt was different.
It featured a genuine degree of legal and social equality between the genders.
And we can see this right away in their art, which always reflects what a society values. In their funerary statues, for example, the wife is almost always shown standing side by side with her husband.
And, crucially, depicted at the same physical scale.
Right, which in Egyptian art is a deliberate statement. Equal size means equal importance.
And while those external careers, bureaucracy, the military, the priesthood, were typically for men, the woman was the absolute ruler within the household. She was the Nebet Per.
The mistress of the house.
Right. Her job was to manage the domestic economy and, most importantly, to ensure there were descendants.
And descendants weren't just about family legacy. They were crucial for practical support in old age and structurally for their parents' journey into the afterlife.
The children had to guarantee that the necessary funerary rites and offerings would continue after their parents were gone.
But the status of women went far beyond just the home. They had unprecedented legal rights.
Unprecedented compared to almost anywhere else in the ancient world. They could own land and property outright. They could buy, sell, and inherit property completely independently of their husbands or fathers.
That's autonomy that's centuries, if not millennia, ahead of its time. What about in terms of contracts or legal disputes?
Women could draft and sign their own wills. And in the event of a divorce, which was relatively common and accepted, a woman was legally entitled to reclaim her dowry.
And she'd often get ongoing financial support.
She was often guaranteed maintenance from her ex-husband. These rights essentially gave women a level of financial and legal autonomy that provided this really robust social stability.
And this legal status occasionally translated all the way to the highest levels of political power.
It did. While male succession was definitely the norm, the system was flexible enough to accept female rulers when it needed to. And we have some stunning examples of women who they broke through that ceiling.
The three most iconic names really stand out.
You have Queen Hatshepsut, who was so powerful, she basically crowned herself pharaoh, and out of political necessity, would appear in official art wearing men's clothes and the false beard of kingship.
Then Nefertiti.
Nefertiti, who ruled alongside her husband Akhenaten, and of course the legendary Cleopatra, who was the final dramatic flicker of the entire pharaonic line.
The fact that their system even allowed for this, even if it was rare, says so much about the underlying flexibility of their laws.
It shows that Ma'at required a stable social structure, and that stability was best served by giving women the legal agency to control their own domestic and economic lives.
Okay, let's pivot to our final figure in this deep dive.
Yeah.
A man whose fame is completely, totally disproportionate to what he actually did in his lifetime.
Tutankhamun.
The great paradox of Egyptian history.
He is the ultimate example of the gap between historical importance and posthumous fame. He became king when he was very young, maybe 8 years old.
He married his older half-sister?
Right, and historically he was. He was insignificant. He was a puppet king, controlled entirely by the powerful priests and the administrative officials we covered earlier.
He died young, at 18, and the cause is still debated.
Disease, an injury, maybe even murder, we don't really know. But this utterly unimportant boy king became the face of ancient Egypt.
And that stardom all started on one day in November 1922.
When the British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years and years of fruitless searching, finally discovered the hidden entrance to his tomb in the Valley of the Kings.
And the discovery itself was just breathtaking. The tomb was virtually untouched, 4 chambers just filled to the ceiling with over 5,000 burial objects. It was this unparalleled glimpse into the royal court.
And it immediately launched a global phenomenon.
Tutmania.
It was christened Tutmania. The cultural ripple effect was immediate and it was massive. All across Europe and the United States, suddenly Egyptian-style jewelry, Art Deco motifs inspired by the tomb, it all became hugely fashionable. The news just captivated the entire world.
And the items they found weren't just the famous gold mask or the giant sarcophagi. They were everyday items that gave a real human face to this ancient world.
Absolutely. The mundane details are what make it so real. We found his golden bed, his chairs, his chariots, even the clothes he wore. One of the famous finds was a board game, Senate, which shows us how this divine ruler spent his downtime.
And that combination of unimaginable wealth with these relatable everyday objects, it made the connection with the 1920s public so personal.
And that fascination has never really gone away. It's been confirmed over and over, right up to the final world tour of his treasures.
It confirms his shift to icon status. The man who was a political nobody, whose main accomplishment was basically dying young and being buried quietly enough that grave robbers missed him for thousands of years.
He became the single most recognizable Egyptian icon. He achieved that immortality every Egyptian wanted, but completely by accident.
What an incredible journey through 3 millennia of human history. When you look back at it all, the realization really hits you that the pyramids, they weren't the cause of Egypt's endurance. They were the proof that their systems were working perfectly.
The true legacy is in those structural elements we analyzed. We saw the organizational necessity of bureaucracy that grew right out of the logistical challenges of the Nile. We saw the revolutionary power of hieroglyphs as the ultimate tool for centralized control and cultural preservation.
We looked at the absolute structure of divine rule under the pharaoh, held together by the power of his symbols and the ritual of his office, ensuring controlled succession through this intense focus on dynastic purity.
And we noted the stabilizing force of their society. The surprisingly progressive legal status of women providing essential stability, and that pervasive, defining force of the cult of death, which guaranteed moral order in this life by promising a terrifying judgment in the next.
They sought immortality through this meticulous ritual and preparation, and their successes, well, it's proven by the fact that we're still here today, unlocking their secrets and just marveling at the sheer scale of their endurance.
And that endurance, ultimately, it all leads us back to that core concept, Ma'at. This idea of divine order, of justice and balance. It wasn't just a religious belief. It was the ultimate ideological framework that made sure all the practical system, the bureaucracy, the writing, the laws, all functioned together for 3,000 years. Everything worked because it was all justified by the need to maintain Ma'at.
So here's the final provocative thought for you to consider as we wrap up this deep dive. The ancient Egyptians built systems for governance, communication, and a fundamental concept of justice, Ma'at, that lasted for 3 millennia. If you look at our modern world today, at the political, technological, and legal structures we are building right now, what modern societal structure or invention do you believe will successfully define, stabilize, and endure for our civilization 3,000 years from now? What are we building today that has the stamina to last until the year 5025?